The courtroom smelled of polished wood and fear. 17-year-old Marcus Johnson stood, hands cuffed, his heart pounding so loud he swore the jury could hear it. Outside, a storm brewed, rain pelting the windows like a warning of the chaos about to unfold. Marcus had always been the kid who kept his head down. Born and raised in a modest Atlanta neighborhood, he was the kind of boy who helped elderly neighbors carry groceries and stayed up late studying for his AP exams. His dream was to become an engineer, to build bridges, literal ones, not the metaphorical kind people always talked about. But that dream felt like a cruel joke now, as he stood in a courtroom facing a life sentence for a crime he didn't commit. It started 6 months ago on a humid July evening. Marcus was walking home from his part-time job at a local bookstore, earbuds in, listening to Kendrick Lamar. The street was quiet, save for the hum of cicadas and the occasional car passing by. He didn't notice the woman trailing him at first. Karen Mitchell, a 45-year-old real estate agent with a reputation for stirring trouble, had spotted him from her porch. To her, Marcus wasn't a kid heading home after a long shift. He was a threat, a stereotype fueled by her own biases. She clutched her phone, dialed 911, and reported a suspicious black male in her neighborhood. The police arrived within minutes. Marcus, unaware of the call, was startled when 2 officers blocked his path, their hands resting on their holsters. "Hands up, kid," one barked. Marcus froze, his earbuds falling out as he raised his trembling hands. He tried to explain was just walking home, he lived 2 blocks away, but the officers weren't listening. Karen stood nearby, pointing and insisting he'd been casing her house. Her voice dripped with conviction, her eyes narrowing as she spun a tale of fear and danger. The officers didn't question her. They didn't check Marcus's ID or ask for his side of the story. They cuffed him, shoved him into the squad car, and drove off as Karen watched, satisfied. The charge? Attempted burglary. The evidence? Karen's word and a blurry security camera image of Marcus walking past her house. It didn't matter that he had no criminal record, no tools, no intent. Karen's accusation was enough to set the wheels of injustice in motion. By the time Marcus's mother, Tanya, arrived at the precinct, frantic and tear-streaked, the damage was done. Marcus was booked, and the system took over like a runaway train. The months that followed were a blur of court dates, sleepless nights, and a growing sense of dread. Tanya scraped together every penny she had to hire a lawyer, but the public defender assigned to Marcus was overworked and underprepared. The prosecution painted Marcus as a dangerous thug, leaning heavily on Karen's tearful testimony. She took the stand, clutching a tissue, describing how terrified she felt that night, how she knew Marcus was up to no good. The jury, mostly white, mostly old, rated up. Marcus's lawyer tried to poke holes in her story, pointing out inconsistencies, but Karen's performance was Oscar-worthy. She was the victim, she insisted, and Marcus was the villain. Tanya sat in the courtroom every day, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. She whispered prayers under her breath, begging for a miracle. Marcus's younger sister, Aaliyah, only 12, clung to her mother's side, too young to fully grasp the gravity but old enough to feel the weight of it. Marcus tried to stay strong for them, forcing a smile when their eyes met, but inside, he was unraveling. He was a kid, not a criminal, yet the world seemed determined to see him as one. As the trial neared its end, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The prosecutor's closing argument was a masterclass in fearmongering, painting Marcus as a symbol of everything wrong with the city. "This young man may seem harmless," he said, pacing before the jury, "but let him go, and who knows what he'll do next." Marcus's lawyer countered weakly, citing lack of evidence, but the jury's faces were unreadable. Karen sat in the front row, her chin high, her expression smug. She'd won, she thought. She'd protected her neighborhood. The day of the verdict arrived like a guillotine. Marcus stood, his knees weak, as the judge read the jury's decision, guilty. The word hit like a punch to the gut. Tanya let out a choked sob, and Aaliyah buried her face in her mother's lap. Marcus's eyes burned, but he refused to cry. Not here, not in front of them. The judge's voice droned on, detailing the sentence, life without parole. The courtroom erupted gasps, murmurs, a few scattered cheers from Karen's supporters. Marcus felt the world tilt, his future slipping away like sand through his fingers. As he was led away in cuffs, Marcus's mind raced. How had it come to this? He was a straight-A student, a kid who'd never even gotten a detention. Yet here he was, branded a felon because of one woman's lie. Karen's face flashed in his mind, her self-righteous smirk, her unwavering certainty. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the guards pushed him forward, out of the courtroom and into a holding cell. Alone in the cell, Marcus sank to the floor, his head in his hands. The weight of the sentence crushed him, but a flicker of defiance sparked deep inside. He thought of his father, Daniel Johnson, a man he hadn't spoken to in years. Daniel was a high-powered attorney, now the U.S. Attorney General, living a world away in Washington, D.C. Marcus's parents had split when he was young, and Daniel's career had kept him distant, a figure more myth than man. But Marcus knew his father's reputation: fierce, brilliant, a champion for justice. If anyone could help, it was him. With trembling hands, Marcus reached for the phone on the wall. He didn't know if his father would answer, didn't know if he'd care. But he dialed the number he'd memorized years ago, a lifeline he'd never thought he'd need. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, a voice deep, familiar, and laced with surprise. Marcus? Dad, Marcus said, his voice breaking. I need you. The call lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough. Daniel's tone shifted from shock to steel as Marcus poured out the story: Karen's lie, the flimsy evidence, the trial's injustices. Daniel didn't hesitate. Stay strong, son, he said. I'm coming for you. Back in Atlanta, the city buzzed with the news of Marcus's conviction. Local activists caught wind of the case, and protests began to form outside the courthouse. Signs reading, "Free Marcus" and "Justice for All" dotted the crowd. Social media exploded, with hashtags like Marcus is innocent trending nationwide. Aaliyah, though young, took to X, posting about her brother's case, her words raw and heartfelt. My brother is not a criminal, she wrote. He's a victim of hate. Her posts went viral, catching the attention of journalists and civil rights groups. Karen, meanwhile, reveled in the attention. She gave interviews to local news stations, portraying herself as a brave whistleblower who'd stopped a crime wave. But her story began to crack. A neighbor came forward, revealing she'd seen Marcus that night, just walking home, minding his own business. Another posted a video on X, showing Karen yelling at kids in the neighborhood before, always quick to assume the worst. The tide of public opinion began to turn, and Karen's carefully crafted image started to crumble. Daniel arrived in Atlanta the next day, his presence like a storm rolling in. He met with Marcus's lawyer, tearing through the case files with a precision that left the overworked public defender in awe. Daniel uncovered inconsistencies the lawyer had missed, discrepancies in Karen's timeline, gaps in the police report, and a glaring lack of physical evidence. He filed an emergency appeal, arguing that Marcus's trial had been tainted by bias and insufficient counsel. But Daniel knew the legal system moved slowly, and Marcus couldn't wait. He needed to fight this battle in the court of public opinion, too. He reached out to a friend at a major news network, and soon, Marcus's story was national headlines. The coverage was relentless, detailing Karen's history of complaints against black residents, her pattern of escalating minor incidents into major ones. A local reporter dug deeper, uncovering that Karen had once falsely accused another neighbor of theft, only to backtrack when confronted with evidence. The more the public learned, the angrier they grew. Protests swelled, with thousands marching in Atlanta, demanding Marcus's release. Karen, blindsided by the backlash, doubled down. She took to X, posting a lengthy thread defending herself, claiming she was being cancelled for protecting her community. But her words only fueled the fire. Commenters tore into her, pointing out the holes in her story, the privilege that let her weaponize her fear against an innocent kid. Her real estate business tanked as clients dropped her, and her social circle shrank. Karen's life, once so carefully curated, was unraveling. In the detention center, Marcus clung to hope. His father's visits became a lifeline, each one bringing news of progress, new evidence, new witnesses, a growing movement. Daniel worked tirelessly, assembling a legal team to dismantle the case against his son. They found a security camera from a nearby store that showed Marcus walking calmly that night, nowhere near Karen's property. They tracked down a delivery driver who'd seen Karen on her porch, phone in hand, minutes before the police arrived, with no sign of distress. The appeal hearing was set for a month later, but the pressure was mounting. The judge, sensing the public outcry, agreed to review new evidence. Daniel presented the case with a fire Marcus had never seen in him, his voice booming through the courtroom as he exposed Karen's lies. He called witnesses, played the security footage, and laid bare the systemic failures that had let this happen. The prosecution scrambled, their case crumbling under the weight of truth. Karen was called to testify again. This time, she faltered. Under Daniel's cross-examination, her story fell apart. She couldn't explain the new footage, couldn't justify her rush to call the police. The courtroom watched as her confidence melted into panic, her lies exposed for all to see. The judge's face hardened, and the crowd outside roared with anticipation. The courtroom was a crucible, its walls humming with the weight of a city's anger. Marcus Johnson, now 18, stood at the defendant's table, his shoulders squared but his heart racing. Outside, a sea of protesters chanted his name, their voices a steady drumbeat against the injustice that had brought him here. The appeal hearing was in its second day, and the air crackled with tension. Karen Mitchell, the woman whose false accusation had derailed Marcus's life, sat on the witness stand, her earlier bravado replaced by a nervous twitch. Daniel Johnson, Marcus's father and the U.S. Attorney General, paced before her, his presence commanding. He held up a tablet displaying new security footage, a grainy but damning image of Marcus walking home that fateful July night, earbuds in, hands in pockets, no hint of menace. "Ms. Mitchell," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the room, "you claimed my son was a threat. This footage shows otherwise. Care to explain?" Karen's face flushed, her eyes darting to the jury. "I was scared," she insisted, her voice thin. "He looked suspicious, walking so late. I did what I thought was right." "Scared?" Daniel's tone was ice. "You called 911 in under 2 minutes. You didn't ask questions, didn't verify. You saw a black teenager and decided he was a criminal." The word "black" landed like a gavel, and the courtroom stirred. Tanya, Marcus's mother, sat in the front row, her hands gripping Aaliyah's, her face a mask of restrained fury. Aaliyah, only 12, clutched her phone, where her posts about her brother's case had ignited a firestorm online. Daniel pressed harder, presenting a pattern of Karen's behavior. He submitted records of her previous 911 calls, 6 in 2 years, all targeting black or brown residents for suspicious acts like jogging or delivering packages. Each time, her claims had fallen apart, but no one had challenged her until now. The jury's faces hardened, their earlier sympathy for Karen evaporating. Daniel called a witness, a delivery driver named Jamal, who'd seen Karen that night. "She wasn't scared," Jamal said, his voice steady. "She was on her porch, calm, scrolling her phone before the cops showed up." The prosecution scrambled, arguing that Karen's fear was reasonable given the neighborhood's crime problem. But Daniel countered with data. Crime rates had dropped 15% in the area over the past year. He painted Karen as a woman who saw threats in every dark face, her prejudice weaponized to devastating effect. The judge, Harold Grayson, leaned forward, his expression grim. The crowd outside grew louder, their chants of "Free Marcus" shaking the windows. Marcus watched it all, his heart a tangle of hope and dread. The past 6 months had been a nightmare. Arrested for attempted burglary based on Karen's word, convicted on flimsy evidence, sentenced to life without parole. He was a straight-A student, a kid who dreamed of building bridges, not breaking into houses. Yet Karen's lie had branded him a felon, stealing his future. In the detention center, he'd clung to his father's promise, "I'm coming for you." Now, seeing Daniel dismantle Karen's story, Marcus dared to believe. The turning point came with a bombshell. Daniel presented a second video, this one from a nearby store's camera, showing Marcus walking home, nowhere near Karen's property. The timestamp matched her 911 call, exposing her lie. Gasps filled the courtroom. Karen's composure cracked, her hands trembling as she tried to explain. I made a mistake," she stammered. "I thought I saw something." "A mistake?" Daniel's voice rose, raw with emotion. "Your mistake cost my son his freedom, his dreams, his dignity." He turned to the jury. "This isn't just about one lie. It's about a system that believed her without question, that let prejudice override truth. You can fix this." The jury deliberated for 3/4 a fraction of the original trial's time. When they returned, the foreperson's voice was firm, "Not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Tanya sobbed, pulling Aaliyah into her arms. Marcus's knees buckled, and he sank into his chair, tears streaming down his face. Daniel rushed to him, his embrace fierce. "You're free, son," he whispered. Outside, the crowd roared, their chants turning to cheers as news spread like wildfire. But justice wasn't done yet. Judge Grayson addressed Karen directly. "Your actions caused irreparable harm," he said, his voice heavy. "This court will recommend a criminal investigation into your conduct." Karen's face went ashen. She slipped out a side door, but the world was watching. Days later, she faced charges of filing a false police report, a felony. Her real estate business collapsed, her clients gone, her social media accounts flooded with condemnation. The woman who'd once held her head high now hid from the cameras. Marcus walked free a week later, stepping into sunlight that felt like a miracle. Tanya and Aaliyah waited, tears in their eyes, alongside hundreds of supporters waving signs. Daniel stood beside him, pride in his eyes. The media swarmed, but Marcus focused on his family, their love anchoring him. Aaliyah showed him her phone, filled with messages from strangers who'd rallied for him. "They believed in you," she said, her voice breaking. Marcus hugged her, his heart full. The aftermath was a reckoning. Marcus's case sparked reforms in Atlanta's police department, with new training on bias and community engagement. Activists cited his story to push for broader change, from body cameras to stricter penalties for false reports. Aaliyah's advocacy group grew, her voice amplifying others like Marcus. Daniel took on pro bono cases, fighting for those the system had failed. Karen's trial came months later. Alone, shunned by her former allies, she faced the consequences of her lies. The evidence was overwhelming, her pattern of false accusations, the videos, the lives she'd upended. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, a bitter mirror to the fate she tried to impose on Marcus. He didn't celebrate. "I don't want her pain," he told a reporter. "I want a world where this doesn't happen again." Marcus returned to school, chasing his engineering dream. He graduated with honors, earning a scholarship to Georgia Tech. At the ceremony, he dedicated his success to his mother's prayers and his father's fight. Aaliyah, now a fierce advocate, cheered from the crowd, her phone still buzzing with support. The scars of his ordeal remained, but so did his strength. His story became a beacon, a call for justice in a world too quick to judge. What do you think? How do we balance fear and fairness, and what does it take to make justice more than a word?